as the head of conservation for Citizen Zoo, which is an organisation that he still supports. And they have a vision for a world filled with wildlife and people engaged with the great outdoors. Elliot has a real passion for urban ecology, community engagement and rewilding. So I will now hand you over to him for what I'm sure will be a fascinating and enjoyable talk. So over to you, Elliot.
Thank you, Maria. Let me just try and share my screen and then we can get going. How is that? Can you see it okay before I begin?
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Maria, and thank you both to Maria and Kieran for inviting me to talk to you all guys this evening. I'm not a member of the London Natural History Society, but I'll make that change this evening or after I've done this presentation for sure. I'm looking forward to becoming a member. As Maria said, my name is Elliot, and I am the Biodiversity Officer for Kingston Council. It's a newly appointed position, which is quite exciting. My job there is mainly at the moment trying to write the biodiversity action plan for the borough and create a biodiversity partnership and try and improve Kingston's biodiversity credentials, which is something I'm looking forward to really getting involved with. But as you said, prior to that, I helped to set up and run an organisation called Citizen Zoo, which was all about trying to engage with communities and empower them to really do some pioneering conservation work and really try and maximise the potential that community has when it comes to conservation. And we utilised a rewilding narrative to try and get more people inspired about that, and it was really good, and we're still doing some good stuff there as well. But today I'm here to talk to you all about our Water Vole project, something that we set up about just over a year ago now, and it is going from strength to strength, which is fantastic. And hopefully by the end of the next sort of half an hour or so, you might have a better understanding of water voles and have a good understanding of what we're trying to do in Kingston to rectify the current sort of situation when it comes to water voles. One thing that I think Kieran helped set up, I know we just put that poll in, but I've asked Kieran to put a few polls together about if you yourself have seen a water vole and if you saw that water vole in the London area. So if we could get those going at some point, that'd be amazing. I don't know if that's going to get in the way of things, but anyway, feel free to try and do these while, hopefully, is that going to block the screen?
It's live now and they're voting, so okay. You'll see the results in a minute.
Amazing.
I've got another 10 seconds to vote.
Cool, 10 seconds. Get the countdown music on.
So we've got 25 out of 31 people have voted.
Interesting. Good to see. I think some people have seen water voles in Greater London, which is fantastic.
Can you see the results, Elliot?
I can indeed, yeah. So we just when can everyone see the results, or should I just go through them quickly?
Everybody can see them, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, there you can see. No, some of you haven't seen them, and those of you who have seen them, I'm sure you will agree that they are absolutely charismatic creatures, and I hope it was a true highlight of your sort of wildlife seeing. I'm going to close that poll now, Kieran. Is that all right? And move to the next slide. Anyway, there we go. Ooh. Hopefully, cool. All right, so if there's one thing that I want you to take from this talk is that when Kenneth Graham wrote Wind of the Willows in 1905, when he referred to the character Ratty, he was not talking about a rat at all. He was talking about a charismatic water vole, and that is so I think that is a sort of antithesis of how water voles can be seen in our culture in the UK. I think they have a very special place. I think they put the hedgehog, taken the hedgehog for a pretty good run for their money when it comes to our favourite mammal that we have. So a truly fantastic species that I think has really well revered amongst many people. Many people aren't going to be offended or appalled if they see a water vole walking, splashing around in the river. So I think that is a really nice thing to know. And I think if anybody has seen it, as some of you have, they are a real joy to see. But to give you some background, so of course water voles are rodents. They're in the same family as lemmings and muskrats and are other vole species. So we've got 4 native vole species in the UK. water voles are the largest. The other ones, of course, are the field vole or short-tailed vole, the bank vole, and then the Orkney vole, which is a bit of a weird one. I think there were some field voles that Neolithic man took off to Orkney thousands, a long time ago, and then they became reproductively isolated and then turned into their own species. We're not sure if they took them across as pets or they scurried across, but anyway, I think Orkney voles are pretty interesting as well. But enough of that, more of water voles. So there's two species of water vole that we sort of recognise. One is the northern water vole, which we have in the UK, and that stretches across across Europe all the way to sort of Russia. Then there's also the southern water vole, which is a lot more restricted distribution, pretty much confined to Italy. And if we look at the sort of the history in terms of the evolutionary history, I think the records that we have take water voles easily back to about 28,000 years. That's why I put a mammoth there. And water voles don't look like mammoths, but they're around sort of the same time as we have mammoths walking around. And something that I think is quite interesting when we're looking at the UK population of water voles is that there's quite a lot of genetic variation between our water voles that you find in England and Wales and those that you find in Scotland. And we think that is because there were two different sort of colonisation events that happened as the glaciers were receding. So we had a particular species, a sort of subpopulation going up to Scotland, and we had a different population coming into England and Wales. So, and that has, even though they are the same species, there are some sort of morphological differences that you can sort of see between the two if you really get your eye in, and also some behavioural differences as well to some extent. There's a bit more background around the humble water vole. As I said, they are our largest water voles. The males are slightly larger than the females, coming in at a maximum size of about 350 grams. And they have the longest tail of any of our voles. So the tail is approximately about half the length of the body, and it's quite a sort of a furry tail as that. And as you can see by the picture there, they're an absolutely beautiful creature to my mind, at least. Nobody can say that's not a cute picture with their chubby rounded shape. They've got that sort of hairy, quite a lot of fur on their nape. Short blunted nose. And I think one thing there that is quite obvious, which sort of demonstrates sort of the ecological role of a water vole, is that it's got its eyes placed, its beady eyes placed very much on it, top of its head, looking out for predators that are looking to turn it into a sandwich. Like all rodents, they have open-rooted teeth. So that means they've continuously got to eat to keep their teeth wearing their teeth down to avoid their teeth growing into their brain. And in terms of their lifespan, they can live for around, maximum they can live for about 3 years, but that's absolutely exceptional. Typically, if they reach a year, that's normal. 2 years is pretty exceptional. 3 years is just a very, very lucky water vole to live that long. But they're really very fecund species. They have absolutely very large litters, or they have litters of about 2 to 5, but they can have 8 of those in one breeding season if the habitat is good enough. So that does show you they are quite a resilient. They can be quite resilient. They can bounce back at those typical sort of booms that we see in rodent populations. So where do they live? So obviously water voles, therefore we typically associate them with our riverine systems. If you look in the textbook, you'll sort of say that a water vole will normally be found within 3 meters of the bank of the river. So they do quite well. Typically, we say they like to keep relatively close to river sides. They need suitable banks to create their burrows because they are sort of burrowing species. And they can create incredible burrows that I'll talk about in a little bit. They very much like open areas which have a range of vegetation. They're not a fan of shade because the more shade you have, the less sort of macrophyte diversity and sort of floral diversity you have in the riverbanks. So they like sort of sunny areas where they can get lots of light to help where the plants can be photosynthesizing. Interestingly, they have been known to climb trees. Especially in sort of winter time. I was talking to somebody who was surveying water voles, and he was walking along the bank looking in the river for the water voles, and he looked, there's a hawthorn tree to his left, and he looked up and there were all these water voles beaming down at him, which was quite a surprise, I think. But yeah, they are quite good climbers, which is a surprise to many. In terms of their typical home range, we deal with this in meters typically because we associate them with a riverine species. Therefore, we're looking at the lengths of the riverside. So therefore, and we sort of deem it to be 30 to 300 meters is their typical home range. Males have a larger home range than females, obviously, when they're trying to find females to mate with that. And the males can become quite territorial then too. The females aren't so. So they're also found in our coastal populations, but interestingly, especially if you look at the European sort of continental behaviours of water voles, they are very well documented to be quite a fossorial species, so like moles or like sort of living underground, creating burrows and stuff like that. Not always along riversides, which is quite interesting. There's also populations in Glasgow which exhibit the same sort of behaviour types. And interestingly, if you look at the evolutionary adaptations that a water vole has to make it sort of a riverine specialist, it has very few of them. It's not like an otter or a beaver, which are super well adapted to living in water. For example, they haven't got webbed feet. They don't really use their tail as a rudder. They can't hold their breath for very long. If they're underwater, their fur becomes sodden very quickly, so they haven't got sort of waterproof fur. So there is quite a lot of interesting sort of things to look at them. You think actually they're not actually particularly well evolved to live on our riverside. One thing I find quite funny: young water voles are typically quite buoyant as well, so they can't get underwater very well. So they sort of can be floating on the top of the water, which is they're struggling to get under, which I imagine could be quite a funny sight. But one thing, what I think that's quite interesting, so if we obviously deem them to be water-loving creatures in the UK, but when the Romans brought over rabbits, which obviously occupy a very similar niche to our sort of land, sort of fossorial species of behaviour when it comes to water voles. So one sort of theory might be that our typical rabbit population might have, along with other factors, might have actually pushed water voles into the riversides and kick them out of the sort of more of wetland meadow areas potentially, which is quite an interesting thought. So water voles might be should be occupying the niche of a rabbit, but actually being pushed into a sort of more less favourable area for themselves. In terms of their diet, they have a very adaptable diet. So they're thought to eat about 227 species of plant. They do have favourites, sort of willow herb and purple loosestrife, meadowsweet, water crowsfoot, and stuff like that. And that's the sort of species you're really looking for if you're looking to have a bank that really is going to be supporting good water vole populations. They have to eat 80% of their body weight every day, so they are very much eating quite a lot of food. And in terms of the behaviour, they spend about 4 hours cycles out on the riverside, and then 4 hours in their burrows, sort of burrowing away, making sure their burrows are nice and clean and doing whatever they're doing inside, looking after their sort of humble abodes. Oh, another thing to say about their diet, which is actually quite an interesting thing I just forgot to say, is especially when females are pregnant and stuff like that, they can also, they will be looking to increase the protein levels that they're taking in, and that's when they're sort of going to go after sort of flowers. And they've also been known to take find dead fish and eat sort of dead fish to boost their protein. So as I say, they are very adaptable species when it comes to their sort of dietary requirements. And everyone says, oh, why are you introducing water voles? Why are you doing it? What is their like ecological role? What sort of benefits do they bring to us? Because that's how humans like to think. But anyway, so they do have a very important ecological role. As I said, they are our biggest vole, so therefore they are food for many. And that includes herons, kestrels, foxes, and especially into sort of more urbanised areas, cats will definitely take them, dogs will definitely pester them. The reason I've written plop there is because one of my most favourite things about water voles is the sound they make in terms of that like plop sound. So what they'll do, they'll typically hide themselves on the side of a riverbank, and they'll be looking out for various prey species to come and attack them. So they're always on the lookout. And if they do feel threatened, they will launch themselves into the water, creating quite a loud plop sound. And then that will then also not only help the water vole obviously evade the predation, but it serves as an alarm call. So once you hear that first plop, you can then listen out to other plops, which might be other water voles who've been alerted to the potential danger, and a really amazing thing to experience. People think about natural sounds that we have in the natural world. That's like dawn chorus or the sound of a wolf, but I think the plops should definitely be up there in those sort of sounds of what we could deem to be a healthy ecosystem. They also create habitat for things like grass snake. Obviously, a grass snake is very much a water-loving snake, and the burrows that they create. So these burrows, which will have chambers where they can raise their young, chambers where they'll keep their food, especially in the winter time, and cache their food. grass snakes can use that as potential habitat. And as they are quite very they are continually eating, they are therefore continually pooing at the same time, so they are going to be spreading seeds around. So they are very important seed dispersers. But I think one of the most important things they do is they're an absolute joy to see, and they'll be a highlight of anyone's day if you first stumble across them or hear them. And they do, of course, then represent that there is quite a healthy ecosystem there supporting, a pretty exciting mammal. And when you're working with any sort of species, it's obviously very important to understand the laws that are around associated with that species. So in England, in the UK, water voles were granted full legal protection underneath the Wildlife and Countryside Act in April of 2008, and that makes it intentionally illegal to intentionally kill or injure or take a wild water vole, possess or control a dead or live water vole, or damage or destroy a place of shelter for them. And that can have penalties up to £5,000 and custodial sentences of 6 months. They're not a European protected species, because in Europe they are, well, they're deemed pretty good numbers. But one important thing when you're looking at the law there, you can also see that the word wild is very much there. So if you're working to do a reintroduction, which I'll talk about in a bit, if you're working with captive bred water voles, you don't require a permit to release them, and depending on the way you're doing it, but you don't require a permit to work with captive bred water voles, which makes it easier when it comes to trying to restore species. Unfortunately, as I'm sure most people on this call are aware, they are thought to be the UK's fastest declining mammal, which is obviously a very unfortunate title. That main claim comes from a seminal paper done by Rob Strachan, sort of it was over a period of 89 to 98, where he documented a 94% loss of territories. The Wildlife Trust did a further study between 2006 and 2015, and that sort of showed that there was a further decline from that point of 30% or so. And that is the main reasons behind that. Obviously, any sort of decline is multifactorial, but we're looking at habitat loss and degradation, which is isolating and fragmenting populations. But the main driver of water vole decline is almost certainly the American mink, which was a lot of them were released, as I'm sure you're aware, in sort of the 80s from mink fur farms. And because the American mink, the water vole has no evolutionary sort of protection equipment to sort of avoid it, they get absolutely devastated when they're present, and so do ground nesting birds. For example, a mink is a relatively small mustelid and can quite easily get inside the burrows of a water vole, so can get in the burrow and eat all the water voles in pretty much a day. And a mink is a very mobile species. They can go up to about 25 kilometers in one day if they're really trying to. So if you had one mink on the one catchment area, especially on a small river, that mink could do a good job of sort of wiping out pretty much a good part of your water vole population in a very short period. So yeah, it is a very big concern, especially when it comes to water voles and our sort of riverine ground nesting sort of birds. And I'm sure everyone saw last week when we had our very first British red list for our mammals, which said 1 in 4 of our species which are threatened with extinction, which again I'm sure comes as no surprise, and that we need urgent action. And obviously the water vole was a very precedent, or a very it raised the profile of the water vole's decline in that piece of work. And one of the sort of quotes that I absolutely I thought was quite interesting that came from Professor Fiona Matthews, who works out at the University of Sussex and chairs the Mammal Society. She said, while we bemoan the demise of our wildlife in other parts of the world, here in Britain, we're managing to send even rodents towards extinction, which I think is great, yeah, which just does sort of typify how ecologically degraded we are as a country, potentially coming in at 189th out of sort of other global rankings in terms of our biodiversity index. So it sort of does show the sort of state in which our nature is, which is not very good. Okay, so now bringing that's hopefully enough background information on water voles. I think it took a bit longer to go through than I intended to, so sorry for waffling a little bit there. But this is the Hogs Mill, a picture of it, and the Hogs Mill is a chalk stream, but it's a chalk stream in southwest London. It flows through Kingston and actually rises in Epsom Newell through chalk beds, which makes it a chalk stream, so internationally rare type of habitat, only about 200 chalk streams on the planet. And then this river itself flows from Epsom Newell about 9.9 kilometres through the spine of Kingston, serving as a fantastic wildlife corridor. And this is the focus of the project that we're sort of working on at the moment. To give you some sort of social history when it comes to the Hogsmill River and the Water Vole, we were fortunate to have a really interesting history. So when Millais painted this famous painting Ophelia, which is, I think it's the most sold postcard out of the Tate, when he painted that in 1851, I think it was, obviously at that time water voles were absolutely teeming on the river, and I think Millais took a shining to the water vole, and in this very picture he actually included a water vole in the background. And yeah, to make it clear, the background was painted along the Hogs Mill, which is quite an interesting thing. He spent about 2 years walking around painting, so it gives you an idea of the ecological health of the river at that time. But he included the water vole in that very picture. And then when he took it to his pre-Raphaelite friends to sort of show what he'd done, they said, "We love the background, but you have to take the rat out." And he was like, "Oh, it's not a rat, it's not a rat." But anyway, he lost that argument. I wish I could go back in time and help support him and sort of say this sort of fundamental ecological differences there are between rats and water voles. But anyway, he lost that, so he had to rob the water vole out of this famous image. But however, if you ever get the chance, which I suppose most people won't, I don't think I ever will, but if you do get them to take the actual original out of the frame and look at the edges of the canvas, you can see little sketches of water voles, which again, sort of, I think is a lovely sort of story. And then if you go into the more recent history of the river, 30 years ago, when many of our volunteers who are working on the current project were walking around the river, they have memories of just seeing water voles in good numbers. And they'd even stand on bridges with their children and throw bread into the river, and it was a good part of their sort of daily nature experience, something that we've lost. But this shows you that we're talking with a pretty recent extinction event. And to give you an indication of that, if we look at the data from Giggle, this shows you all the sort of records of water voles that we have along the catchment. The yellow dots being water voles, the sort of more scary black dots being American mink. And you can see, well, here, this is the river here, and you can see there was quite good numbers. Obviously the crane over here in Richmond had a lot better numbers, but we did have good numbers. And then those numbers steeply declined, as you can see by this image, which represents as a Giggle data set, which from more recent times. And it just shows you that. And I think the last sort of really official record that we had on our river was about 2014 for the last waterfall. So even if there was maybe one or two, which I very much doubt, because we've been actively surveying the river, they're almost certainly, or definitely functionally extinct along the river. The minimum viable population of water voles is about 100 individuals. So in peak breeding time, so water voles have a very high death rate in the winter. They're about 70% decline, but in the summer you're looking for about a good population, about 100. So we clearly haven't got those healthy populations here any longer. So this is what brought this project around, which is the Get InVOLEd project. It's a title that I absolutely love. Most people don't realise that I've dropped the V, but when they get it, they might, when you see that, hopefully you can recognise what we've done there. And I think that therefore sort of sets the tone of this, because this is not only hopefully going to be an ecological restoration project, but it's meant to be a community empowerment project where we're getting as many people involved to love our natural world and help engage with some really interesting sort of conservation work, and show how communities, when inspired, they can do really, really fantastic stuff. So we actually launched this project last summer at a big event in our local theatre in Kingston called the Rose Theatre. It had 800 seats, and we were rather sort of scarily thought, we're going to book out our theatre and we're going to do a wildlife event where we're going to try and get local people excited about local wildlife, just to show, to try and gauge what sort of interest there was. Not expecting to sell the place out, but we did. So we had 800 people there, all listening around local stories about the local natural world and water voles, which was absolutely amazing, and gave us which I think sort of demonstrates the interest that there is generally amongst sort of the British public when it comes to wildlife. When you look at things like Spring Watch and stuff like this, there really is a really we have an interested community of people who I think is a real benefit and a real sort of a lot of potential there if we are able to engage and mobilise them as much as we can. So this put us on a really sort of good stepping stone to sort of launch this project, because we got to talk to lots of people in a very short space of time about our intentions to try and bring waterfalls back to our river. We also engaged the services of this chap. He's, to my mind, one of the most pioneering conservationists that we have in the UK. He works with all sorts of species, from beavers to wildcats to harvest mice, and all sorts of stuff. But what I really see him as a specialist as is water voles. So Derek Gow, I think, has really pioneered water vole reintroductions across the UK. Initially, I think it started with a few disasters, but he's managed to change his methodology, and now he's breeding about 25,000 water voles at his specialist farm in Devon and leading water vole reintroductions across the UK. So really, really helping to pioneer and sort of bring proactive conservation methods back to, a really, really fantastic chap and organisation, and something that we need in our sort of depleted nature systems that we have at the moment. So we got Derek involved. He came and actually spoke at our Wild Kingston event, and we also took him along the river. So obviously in those days we could stand close together pre-COVID, and we took him along the river, and Derek was actually quite impressed by the habitat that we had there presently. He thought there are many areas across the catchment where water voles would be able to quite easily live presently, because they had the appropriate sort of habitat and sort of food species available to them, which was a nice surprise. So we thought that again was quite a good start to the project. And we've also, and Derek has helped advise through many parts of the sort of project, and also he'll be the source of our water voles when the time comes. But a big part of this project is all about trying to engage as many people as possible, to get them as excited, to really make people think that the river and water voles are part of the community that we belong to, and really sort of define those values. So during the course of the project so far, we've done lots of community talks, we've done school talks, we went to festivals when we were allowed to go to festivals. We even did spoke at the Natural History Museum at London Recorders Day, which was a really nice event to sort of showcase the project. And now we've engaged over 4,000 people, so they all know about water voles a little bit more, I hope, and hopefully some of them. And that then helped us, try and generate more motivation and interest in the project. And we also asked Derek what other sort of projects he was aware of where communities have helped to bring back water voles to local catchments. And to his mind, he could only really think of one. So he put us in the direction of the South Downs National Park, to this river here called the Meon, which is another chalk stream. And I met this lovely lady called Elena who ran their community water vole project. And she gave us lots of good tips. And one nice thing, when we were standing on that bridge in this small village, I was looking down into that very patch of green that you can see there in the stream, and there were 4 water voles, or maybe 3 water voles, all staring back up at me. So again, an absolutely amazing thing to see. And Elena was really, really useful for many reasons. And I think one of those main reasons was defining our methodology for looking at habitat. So initially, when it came to me trying to define our community monitoring program of how we were going to look at the present habitat on the stream, I wanted to use the fantastic works of Rob Strachan here, who was a very keystone figure in water vole conservation. He pretty much wrote the conservation handbook, which you can see there. And I wanted to try and use his methodology and apply it to an urban community context, to see how, and use that as our way of mapping our habitat. However, when I met Elena, she said, that's great, but I tell you what, you're working with a community, and I think we can still generate very robust data by simplifying it. So she said, all you need to do is ask these 8 questions, and tick them, and each is approved for one for the left bank, one for the right bank, and then you can get a very good indication of the overall habitat quality when it comes to looking through the eyes of water voles. So we then adopted this methodology in terms of how we tried to survey the river using volunteers. So what we did, we went to Thames Water. We managed to secure some funding from the Chessington Conservation Fund, which is based out of Chessington World of Adventures. And with that money, we were able to recruit an intern and put on some training days. So we put on 2 training days last summer, and that attracted, and as soon as we put these training days out into the public domain, we had 30 spaces on each, and both filled up like that. It was amazing. So it was great to see that interest. So we had 60 people that we were able to put in a classroom, tell them about water voles, and tell them how to try and survey for water voles, or the habitat at least. So this enabled us to go out onto the river and conduct surveys of the entire catchment at a much easier scale, or cheaper scale, definitely, if we were going to go out to ecological consultants to do this. So it was a really good way of not only getting robust data, but also engaging the community in really important sort of citizen science. So this is what we actually ended up with. So what we did, we mapped the river in 100-meter segments, and each of the, and then we categorized it into each 100-meter segment into red, amber and green for unsuitable, suboptimal and potentially good habitat. The blue, you can see there is stuff we couldn't get to, backs of people's gardens or where the river might be underground, because it is quite a highly urbanized river in some places. But what you can take from that map is there are some good areas already of green space that are appropriate for water voles, which is good. I think one thing, if we were going to do this again, we would try and have a green plus plus to try and show you where there's really, really, really optimal, and then other, just to try and get a bit more clarity in the data. But overall, for our first attempt, it was a fantastic a bit of work. And the guys at Giggle were amazing at supporting us to help define this methodology and use our GIS systems for it. And it actually attracted lots of great interest. We even got on Sky News when they released the State of Nature report, which was fantastic. And as I say, one of the most important parts of this was the community, because they just absolutely got involved and still are getting involved. This is a picture of us down here doing a water vole reading group and talking about the project and showing how water voles inspired them. And it really has created a real sense of community and sort of inspiration, and sort of shows you what we can do when we inspire people. Another element of the project, of course, when you're looking at water voles, as I mentioned, mink are a very big issue. So one thing we have to do is monitor for the presence of American mink using these floating rafts. There were mink recorded the river a few years ago. We've now got 10 of these rafts deployed along the catchment, and they're regularly monitored on a weekly basis. We're also using camera traps at the areas to try and increase the robustness of our sort of survey method. We might have had one anecdotal sighting this season, but we've yet not to really have any clear evidence that we've got mink present. Of course, we have to deal with the American mink once they're on the catchment, and we're actually trying to look at sort of ethical, more humane ways of finding maybe captive populations you can take in Norfolk or areas like that to avoid us from potentially having to put down the animals. So we're trying to look at all our options. But one thing that is for certain, we have to be very clear that American mink are not on the river when we do our reintroduction. And this is monitoring that will have to go on to the far distant future, because as I say, mink are very mobile species, and they'll be able to come back to the river very, we have to always, because they're so mobile, they can come back at any time. So we'll always have to monitor them. This is us building them. We've also got lots of working groups going together. So we've got groups that are looking at fundraising, we've groups that are looking at our habitat restoration stuff. We've got groups who are looking at how we can engage more people, especially on lockdown. So this is a picture of us in Kingston University, where we used to do our meetings. We've had to now modify ourselves into the virtual world, as you guys have managed to achieve. And we're doing monthly meetings as a big group, and we're doing lots of working group meetings around that, which is a really good way to maintain interest and really empower people to really have influence and keep them motivated, which can be quite difficult through lockdown, because obviously it's quite a scary time, but something that has been, again, a real key part of this project. And something I want to do now, we've got somebody called Jack on the call, who's one of our amazing volunteers, and I wanted Jack to talk for maybe a couple of minutes just to say how he's enjoyed the project and why he got involved. And so, Jack, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Elliot. How are we doing?
Good, mate. Thanks for doing this.
No worries. Well, thanks for you for setting all this up. Yeah, guys, I just really wanted to sort of, say a bit of words of, why I do in the project and why I'm involved in it and sort of the importance I see of it. But a bit of background on myself. I currently work in a public health university, and I used to work in fundraising, and now I'm sort of doing some project management stuff. And obviously these are all great skills that I was able to put towards this project, Water Vole project. And I sit in one of the working groups, which is the fundraising side, which you can imagine. So being able to bring my experience from dealing with like major giving and sort of crowdfunding stuff to sort of channel where we're going with the fundraising, and work with 4 other people, including Elliot, really to try and bring the money in, and so we can keep this community engagement and sort of, keep on target, so we can try and release these water voles and make sure the habitat is suitable. But just to start from sort of like the beginning and how I got involved, as Elliot mentioned, he was on Sky News. And I think it popped up on Facebook. I saw him there explaining sort of about the project and, you know, how there's community engagement in there and people directly getting involved doing the surveying. And it, you know, for me, it's a little fascinating being able to actually get involved in doing some data stuff and getting on the ground and doing more for trying to bring back this waterfall. And also I did actually go to university in Kingston as well, so you know, it had a bit of very relevance to me as well, and used to walk along the Hogs Mill, enjoyed like seeing the environment there and the biodiversity that was there. So you know, the project sounded amazing. So then next was, you know, turning up to the meetings, and we do meetings each month, and again, it says it's now switched online. And the people were there were amazing. You know, everyone from all different backgrounds, different ages, bringing all their different skills. And it was, for me, it was you know, so inspiring. So from that point onwards, I wanted to get involved. And I think that's, so for me, that's, you know, what is really important about this project. Obviously, the importance is we're trying to, you know, bring back a species locally and stop it from becoming critically engaged, and hopefully rolling out how we're approaching this to other places. And that's, you know, that's the front-facing importance of the project. But I think, you know, for me, and what Elliot's said throughout the whole of this talk, in the name itself, Get Involved, it's all about the importance is getting people involved. And that's the really exciting thing. It's like we're getting all these people, and it shows that conservation could be for anyone and everyone. And that's how, for me, I foresee that that's how projects should be, because it's the local community who will be able to make a difference, who will be able to implement this lasting change. And it's just really exciting to be directly involved and with all these people who have the same amount of passion. So sort of where we are at the moment, we're sort of putting together we've done a few grant applications and stuff like that to raise some money, but also putting together a crowdfunder, which is really exciting, which will be launching at the end of this month. So we've got everyone together to sort of do videos about why they're interested in it, what their connection is with the Water Vole. And so we're going to be launching that in about a month's time. So it's going to be really exciting to sort of build that momentum to get people supporting the project. Yeah, so that's sort of really why I got involved, and why I think it's you know, a really exciting thing that's happening in a local area. And we hope that hopefully we can take sort of this model and, you know, replicate it around London, around the UK, and get, like you said, Elliot said, there's only, from what he's understanding, one other project where it's this real community engagement. And for me, like I said, that's really core to why I joined and how I see really things making a difference. But yeah, so that's sort of my involvement, and why I think it's great.
Thank you, Jack. That was great. Really appreciate you taking the time to do that. But it's amazing. And Jack's also just got onto a conservation master's course, so he's going to be doing that next year, which is awesome.
Yes, yeah. So which
hopefully it helps you
in
terms of your progression and hopefully into the sector, which is a really good thing as well. So yeah, well, thanks for that, Jack. And yeah, you'll be here for that. Thank you. All right, on to the next. So now, just to give you a bit more idea about what we're doing now, especially as Jack said, in lockdown, we're trying to ramp up as much of the community engagement as possible in lieu of this fundraiser that we're going to do. We're doing all sorts of things. So some of our volunteers have done amazing sort of stuff that we'll be launching soon. For example, one of our volunteers has created this whole very homemade sort of film about this water vole that was friends with Millet, and then they was very upset when she found out she wasn't included in the painting. And then we've done making finger puppets for kids out of water vole finger puppets. So there's loads of cool ways in which we're going to try and engage people with the amazing world of water voles. And one thing we've also done, we've sort of created these sort of COVID masks like this. So we've got volunteers making these masks, and my mum's been amazing at making them, we're selling these on the Citizen Zoo website to try and help raise money for the Water Vole project. So a really good sort of thing, and you can, if you're interested, you can check those out. So our future plans, obviously with lockdown, there has been some elements of delay, as I'm sure many conservation projects have felt across the UK. So we're still awaiting for one weir to be knocked out on the Hogs Mill. So all the weirs, all the man-made obstacles have been knocked out along the entire catchment, apart from one. So we just want that one to be sort of knocked out, and then that means there'll be no more sort of large-scale machinery trampling down around a water vole habitat, because unfortunately that one weir that's remaining is very much in a key area that we're looking to do our primary release. So hopefully that'll be completed next year, and then we're looking to actually do our release in the beginning of 2022, which I'll come on to in a second. We're also doing targeted habitat restoration. So the good thing about the Hogs Mill is a massive community of other charitable organisations like South East Rivers Trust, Water Trust, and all sorts of charities who are doing some really good conservation work. Kingston Uni do lots of stuff, the Lower Moles do lots of stuff. So there's targeted habitat restoration happening along the catchment, which is really useful stuff. We're going to be doing continued mammal raft monitoring for mink and stuff like that, so that's going to continue. And obviously there'll be continued community engagement. Once we've got the water voles on the river, we want to have the vole patrol, and these will be people going out on a regular basis looking for water voles to see in there. And of course, Jack mentioned the fundraising, which is something that's very important because we still need to raise money to actually purchase these water voles. And as I'm now the Biodiversity Officer for Kingston, as part of the Habitat Action Plan that we're putting, the Biodiversity Action Plan we're putting together, we will probably do a flagship species action plan around water voles, as many other local boroughs have water vole plans. So we'll try and integrate something like that into sort of planning local policy. So this is the crowdfunder. Just to be able to be a bit cheeky of me, at the end of August, we're going to be launching this. If you are interested, keep your eyes peeled for our crowdfunder. We've got to raise about £15,000 to try and buy our water voles. And we're actually looking to buy around 200 water voles because it's very important when you do a reintroduction that you sort of look at the sort of guidelines when it comes to it. And there's various elements you have to look at where we release. And as I said previously, the minimum viable population of water voles is about 100. So we're looking to release about 200 along about a 4 kilometre stretch. So it's very important that we follow sort of best practice guidelines when it comes to reintroducing these to make sure we establish a viable and self-sustaining population. So as I've tried to put out for the whole way of this sort of project, the community has been at the heart of this. It always will be the heart of this. I think conservation needs to be very much a community-minded entity, as I'm sure many of you will agree with, and you can really have the most benefits, conservation benefits, when the community back it and you just have so much more power. So hopefully we can use the lessons learned from this project, and it can help inspire more people to get involved and inspire more conservation efforts moving forward. Sorry for overrunning a little bit there, but thank you so much for listening. And if you've got any questions, please do let me know.
Okay, yeah.
As well. These are 2 great books.
Thank you very much, Elliot, and thank you to Jack as well. That's really good. I really enjoyed that. That was great. I liked your kind of enthusiasm, and I thought it was very interesting thinking about the levels of community involvement, and I like the way you were kind of working alongside another project and really working in a kind of collaborative way. I thought that was great. So there may well be questions from the audience. So just a reminder, you've got the option of raising your hand to ask a question, or you can put your question in the chat box. So I don't know if do we have any questions in the chat already, Kieran?
There was just one question from Val, who just wanted to clarify with the home ranges. You mentioned 30 to 300 metres. Is that 30 to 300 metres from the borough, and is it just up and downstream, or can you clarify exactly? Yeah, clarify.
Well, obviously, if you talk to sort of any ecologist, they'll say home ranges is pretty much a very vague sort of tool when it comes to describing species behaviour. So it's very difficult when you're trying to be overly prescriptive. But when you look, so you can look at it in 2 ways. When you're looking at a waterfall population on a river, you can look at the length of it. So we'll say 30 metres can be an area of water vole habitation. And that is what we would deem to be the home range, but it's quite small. But males typically have larger. So it all depends on habitat type. It depends on many things. And then if you look at a sort of wetland meadow, you would then be looking at a different sort of metric there, because you're looking at more area like hectares or sort of areas rather than lineal lengths. But yeah, it's very variable depending on the habitat and availability. But it just tries to give you some idea of what habitat you need when you're re-releasing the creatures.
Yeah, because obviously that's something that you really need to bear in mind. You need to think about the quality of the habitat, but you also need to really understand it and what's kind of appropriate in terms of the voles. I've got a question that I'm just intrigued about, the difference between the Scottish and the English water voles, because I had no idea that there had been 2 kind of separate colonisation events. So you said there were a couple of differences in their behaviour and so on. Would you mind just tell us a little bit about that?
Again, well, there's sort of 2 sort of differences that get sort of nodded at. Again, it's a bit of rule of thumb when it comes to this sort of stuff. But typical, the water vole populations in Scotland can be a bit more melanistic, so a bit more black in terms of their fur. And then, as I said, in Glasgow, they've got a good population of, I think they're under threat of development at the moment, but more fossorial populations, so where they're living in sort of a housing estate. So you're looking at more sort of continental behaviour.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the sort of two real differences that I'm really aware of. But yeah, it's interesting that there's two different. It was definitely two colonisation events.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had no idea. Do we have anybody else in the audience who'd like to ask a question? So please don't feel shy. You can put your hand up. You can kind of click virtually if you want to put your virtual hand up, or you can give us a wave, or you can put something into the chat box. So please, please do ask anything that you'd like to know, because this is a good opportunity to ask somebody who knows a lot about this kind of project.
While people are raising their hands left, right, and centre, we have got a couple from the chat.
Thanks,
so,
Kieran.
a quick one for you, Elliot. How many types of vole are there in the world?
Good question. No idea. Probably lots.
That's one for Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And, Emily has asked, if you do find water voles there, will you still get more to reintroduce?
Absolutely. Well, we've surveyed the river very extensively, and there's definitely not functional populations there. So if we do, as I said, because they're not a very mobile species, so they're not going to recolonize the area naturally, and sort of, we've devastated populations across the UK. So we have to be a bit more proactive when it comes to releasing stuff, I think. So if we've got the habitat available to them and the conditions are available, I think it's our sort of a moral duty to reintroduce where we can, to make sure we have these more thriving, complex ecosystems. So, yeah, even if we found one sort of poor, lonely vole who somehow miraculously managed to survive over the course of the last sort of 10 years or 20, 30 years, that still wouldn't be deemed to be a functional population. So we're looking to really have a self-sustaining, booming, thriving population in the river. And for that to happen in sort of the short term, where we need these sort of changes to combat sort of the ecological collapse that we're suffering, we're going to need to release these. And the Derek's really pioneered the sort of the methodology when it comes to breeding and releasing. So we're lucky to have the sort of conservation tools in our armoury to combat.
There's a couple of more questions from the chat. Some from A. Hayes, which was about basically just to clarify, when were their voles last known to have been on the Hogs Mill? And also, how is this project linking up with, or are there any other projects sort of locally or in London that this is kind of going to connect up with?
Sure. So to my knowledge, the last official verified record was 2014. So we're talking quite a long time ago. And that, again, was quite unprecedented. If you look at the giggle data, there's very little there. As I say, if you go back 30 years, there were thriving populations in the river. But working with our catchments, that's so important. I'm hoping what we're doing here can help create a methodology for other catchments to use for mapping habitat and engaging with local people to be able to be part of that process. The main other catchment, we obviously work very closely with the Hogs Mill Catchment Partnership as a group of stakeholders along our river. But the River Crane with Force is an amazing entity who do lots of volunteering work, and we're trying to work with them as much as possible. I've been talking to people like Rob Gray and Ian McKinnon from the start of this project, and any other catchments that are willing to listen, I'll happily go and talk to. As I say, I think conservation is very much a collaborative. We need a collaborative.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
We're still sort of learning here to some extent, because it's quite an urban environment for this sort of methodologies we deployed to. So very, very happy to try and contribute in a collaborative manner as much as we can.
And then we've got a question from Angela Linor, and she's basically saying, did you say that the water voles are restricted to chalk streams? And if so, is there a way of identifying? I guess a way of identifying chalk streams.
No, so they're not. Sorry if I confused you a little bit. So no, not at all. So chalk streams obviously support a very sort of potentially unique ecology when it comes to sort of the river invertebrates and stuff. But water voles are not in any way restricted to chalk streams. They can, as I say, be found in fossorial populations and on any sort of stream. The main thing you're looking at is the presence of predation from alien species, and also the food availability available to them. But they have such an adaptable diet that I reckon they could surprise us. So yeah, they're not restricted to chalk streams at all.
Yeah, one of the things about the diversity of what they ate, I found that really interesting because, again, I hadn't realised that they were so kind of eclectic in what they were willing to tackle. Right, we seem to have lots more questions, so let's try and get through a few more. From Roger Payne, what's their social organisation? Do they live in extended family groups? How do they kind of organise themselves?
Yes, they are typically sort of a gregarious species. When you start getting good population levels, a good way of surveying for them is looking at latrines, where you can find the sort of droppings and stuff. But they will live in sort of gregarious sort of meta populations. And when it's sort of breeding time, the males will get a bit more territorial. But they're not solitary by any means. They'll have collective burrows.
Okay, Leah Pilmer would like to know, can water voles be found all over the world? I don't know if that's another Wikipedia kind of question.
So the northern Europe, the two species of water vole that I'm aware of, we've got the southern water vole, which is pretty much restricted to Italy, and then we've got the northern water vole, which is UK, not Ireland, so UK, and across sort of mainland Europe to Russia. So that's sort of distribution, global level for water voles.
Okay, Ellie Johnston is asking about, do you collaborate, share data with the National Water Vole Monitoring Programme at all? It's run by PTES.
I've tried to get in contact with PTES a few times, but where we send all our data to, or will be sending all our data to, is Giggle. So obviously we haven't actually got any species records here because we haven't got any species on it, but we're looking at just habitat data at the moment. But once we do start, hopefully the reintroduction takes place, and we will have the vole patrol, because the point of any sort of successful reintroduction program, we need longitudinal monitoring to see the success of it or failure of it. So we'll share. We're not going to be restricted in where we share the data. So any sort of ecological record centre that PTS have, or as I say, London with Giggle have, we will share that data as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, Giggle's obviously a fantastic resource, actually. So I don't kind of know what the data work, how that data sharing works. But I mean, if it's going into Giggle, it's kind of going to be, I would have thought, then going out and being accessible. Okay, there's a bit of discussion about the chalk stream. So you've obviously started something there. Okay, which maybe somebody's kind of already answered that. So Leah Pilmer's asked, what countries have lots of chalk streams and which country has the most water voles? And then Nick Fulton's telling us a bit about how there are 200 chalk streams in the world, and they're all in southern England or northern France. Various. And some there's some in the north as well. Okay, so I'll leave people with that. Do we know about which countries got particularly high populations of water voles? You were suggesting, like in Europe generally, they're fairly common. Are they particularly prevalent in certain places?
I couldn't tell you. I know mainland. Well, I know. Well, of course, mainland Europe, they're not a European protected species for the purpose of they're sort of not deemed to be critical out there. But as we saw from our UK red listing last week, that they're definitely a problem here. But in terms of, I know what the type species was done in Sweden, like Uppsala. So I imagine Sweden is pretty good at this sort of stuff, and so I reckon they've got a good population. And anywhere where they've got good sort of intact habitats and streams across Europe, I'm sure they'll be pretty prevalent. But I couldn't tell you what countries are leading the charge.
Okay, so we're going to have to I think we've got time for one more question, if that's okay. So just, I think we might not get all of them done. Sorry. The next one is asking about mink. So a mink a problem in mainland Europe where the water voles are less threatened, or was that particularly a problem here?
It's very much identified as the main sort of one of the serious factors of their decline in the UK, without a shadow of a doubt. To be fair, I haven't really studied European populations. I know it must be a problem, but I don't know. I don't know the factors associating sort of mainland populations. I mainly focus on UK. Yeah. So I couldn't tell you, but good question.
Yeah, and then, okay, I think this has to be the very last one. So are there ways that you've tried to measure the impact on well-being for the community members engaged in the project? So what kind of, obviously you've been thinking about the water voles, but what about the people? What kind of difference do you think it's making to them?
Yeah, well, what a fantastic question. I wish we'd done more monitoring of this. I sometimes get a bit scared of sending people forms all the time, but I think we haven't done enough monitoring of that, for sure. I think that's something we can improve on. So yeah, very good point. Because I do think, engaging with nature at any level is going to have so many well-being benefits. And I think when you're part of actually a proactive conservation project, bringing your, a species back to your local environment, that must It makes me feel good, so I'm sure it makes everyone feel good too. So,
yeah. Okay, yeah, that's and thanks Seb for that question as well. That was a really nice one to finish on. So it's 7:30 and that's all we're going to have time for this evening. But thank you again so much to Elliot for a really great talk. I hope